You're listening to the Carbon Arc. I'm Toby Roan, and welcome to the Carbon Arc. It's Thanksgiving week 2022, and my guest is Bob Madison. We'll be talking about King Kong Escapes, a co-production between Toho and Rankin Bass. Yep, that Rankin Bass. It was released in Japan in 1967, and in the States in 1968, where it was paired with Don Knotts in The Shakiest Gun in the West. My guest is Bob Madison. He is a writer, and he is about to unleash upon the world Spiked, a young adult novel that will be available on Amazon, and I'll let him tell you about it now. Bob, take it away.
You know, unleashed sounds kind of interesting. It's almost like a plague. I'm going to unleash upon the world. Well, so Spiked is a young adult novel. It is or will be released December 1st and will be available on Amazon.com. And I'm very excited about it because it's actually about two kids who are surprisingly like you and me. They are uber nerds. One's named AJ and the other's named Tom, and they live next door to each other, and they've been best friends all their lives. And you know, they were in the same playpen when they were babies, and they spend their growing up watching Star Wars and Star Trek, and they become absolutely obsessed with Lord of the Rings. But then one of them, as they're in high school, becomes obsessed with a major league bad boy baseball star, Jason Spike Tutman, and things get really weird. So with baseball now their major obsession, one of the boys says that his great desire is to meet up with his new hero, and it's about the two kids meeting up with their hero, which is an extraordinarily bittersweet experience, and it turns out to be sort of comic and heartfelt and romantic. So I have it on the best authority that this is actually quite an excellent book. So I'm looking forward to it. It is my first young adult novel. You know, it is like things that I like, both funny and sweet.
The world's mightiest monster meets the world's mightiest menace. King Kong, bigger, stronger, more ferocious than any living creature, faces his greatest challenge in King Kong Escapes. For now, Kong meets his greatest foe, a duplicate King Kong created by an evil genius, built of indestructible super steel, 60 towering feet of invincible robot. King Kong, who can defy the might of modern artillery, tanks, missiles, the vast strength of prehistoric monsters, clashes with the Kong of Steel in the battle of the century in King Kong Escapes. All new, all thrilling, more fantastic than ever, King Kong Escapes. A Toho Company Limited picture, universal release in Technicolor.
Well, so I'll jump in and say, for a whole host of reasons, some personal and some aesthetic, I am crazy about this movie. I've always loved it. I actually have the British quad poster for King Kong Escapes in my bedroom. And this thing is roughly the size of a bookcase. And let's just say I'm married to a very understanding person. So I wanted to do this for Thanksgiving because there is this great tradition on the East Coast, particularly in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, of broadcasting King Kong, Son of Kong, Mighty Joe Young, and then King Kong Escapes on Thanksgiving Day or Thanksgiving weekend. And this was this enormous thing, you know, and it started, I think, as a joke that then became a tradition. And every Thanksgiving, people would tune in for Kong. And oddly enough, they would never play them in sequence. Sometimes we'd start with Son of Kong, then Mighty Joe Young, and then King Kong Escapes, and then King Kong, or some other variation of this. And it was, on the East Coast, a great tradition for people to have that on in the background while they're having Thanksgiving dinner, or for the kids to be, you know, in the den or the living room, you know, Konging out while the parents were making dinner, or while the parents were eating dinner and the kids weren't particularly interested.
New. More fantastic than ever, can the sinister Doctor Who enslave King Kong's fantastic strength? Can King Kong defy the might of modern artillery, tanks, missiles? See King Kong battle primordial monsters, an air armada, submarines, and finally see King Kong battle man's most evil creation, a robot Kong of steel. In the battle of the century, King Kong escapes.
Friday at 3.
I want to give a particular and special shout out to the guy who started this. There was a man who was very important to mystery fiction historian fandom and movie fandom named Chris Steinbrenner, who was not only a film collector, but he was also a writer back in the early days when film criticism was something you did, in the movies or next to your television with a notebook. I mean, you didn't have VHSs, let alone DVDs and streaming. And he wrote the films of Sherlock Holmes and the cinema of the fantastic.
Okay.
And when he was 14, he actually wrote a script for the Shadow radio show. When he was 14, that got picked up, and he became the youngest member of the Mystery Writers of America. And I was very lucky in that I lived about 5 blocks away from him when I was growing up, and I met him when I was 14 or so. And he was really a second father to me in many, many ways. I loved him dearly, and I was close to him until the end of his life. He died very young, tragically. But when he wasn't writing about film, or he was the vice president of the Mystery Writers of America for like 20 years. He was the program director of WOR Channel 9. He created, and I just love this because I can always tell this, he created the $1 Million Movie. And the $1 Million Movie was this thing, it was a big East Coast thing where he would schedule a big movie, King Kong, Citizen Kane, something like that, and he would play it the whole week 16 times. So, it'd be on at 8 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 9 o'clock in the morning. And this was really this sort of film school for people who, of course, he had no idea that they even existed. But, if you scratch Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino and Tim Burton, they all grew up watching the $1 Million Movie and watching these movies that they grew to love again and again and again, and learning why these were important. And as program director, one Thanksgiving on a lark, he scheduled Kong, Son of Kong, Mighty Joe Young, and the ratings went through the roof, and no one really knew why. But they did it again the next year and the next year. And then after that, they started expanding it through Thanksgiving weekend. So Thanksgiving Day was Kong Day, and then there would be, the Friday after Thanksgiving. This is before it became a big deal and it was Black Friday. It was just, the day where you have indigestion. And people would watch, he would then, book Godzilla films. And you would just spend Thanksgiving. And it was a key part of my boyhood, and I think key part of boyhood of a lot of people. And King Kong Escapes was central to that. It was actually in some weird way, it's certainly not the equal of King Kong by any stretch of the imagination, but in some weird way, it's my favorite of the bunch.
It's one that I keep turning to over and over and over. I love it. As much as I love so many of those kaiju movies, I think this one is my favorite. I tended as a kid, especially to the quality of the movie was measured in how much of its running time actually featured the monsters. And this one has a lot of monsters in it. So that automatically made it one of the best. Not a bunch of people standing around talking, not a lot of spaceships or whatever, just guys in suits tearing up a plastic Tokyo or whatever.
What more do you want to?
So anyway, this one has a particular interest to me. And when I was in school in the 70s growing up in Raleigh, North Carolina, they had a summer film matinee at the Cardinal Theater, part of the North Hills Shopping Center there in Raleigh. It's a great big theater. And on Saturdays at 11 o'clock, they ran movies like this. Your mom would drop you off and she'd go to the mall. Me and my friends would sit there and watch these things. And so I got a chance to see these movies on the big screen, Toho Scope and Technicolor, and they were just beautiful. They blew me away. A lot better than the matinees that were playing in the summertime, like when my daughter was growing up, where it would be, Little Mermaid and Despicable Me. And we had them on DVD at home. So what was the point of taking her over there to the theater and giving her $27 so that she can get a small Coke and a bag of popcorn.
No, I thought that those matinees, they did them. I think it was the same series, and they had the weirdest films in there. So I distinctly remember seeing King Kong Escapes during one of those summer matinees. We were probably seeing it roughly the same weekend in different cities, but they also had movies like Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and Conqueror Worm, and I and there's Vincent Price drowning people and whipping them, and even at 12 I thought, this was probably a mistake.
Right. Well, the ones that it was almost always Godzilla movies where we were, except for Mad Monster Party. They ran that one, which I was really excited about. But the one that I really loved out of the batch, because they never ran King Kong Escapes, I didn't see it except on TV, was War of the Gargantuas with Russ Tamblyn. That one. So, it's weird. There's that period of time, you're like 12, 13, 14. I just went nuts. It was movies like this that really made me love movies in general. My appreciation of, better movies came along later, but it was movies like this and Jaws and, War of the Worlds, things like that just made me love movies. So,
well, they were portals to the imagination. I mean, a movie like King Kong Escapes, and we'll get to this in a minute, but when you start talking about the plot, at some point your head starts to explode.
Exactly.
The plot is actually important, and it's part of why it's so beloved by nerds like us. It's a type of movie making that you don't see anymore, because of the plot and because of how over the top it is, and how just wonderful it's. I would love to play this for a contemporary 12-year-old and see what they think, because I think it's unbeatable entertainment for a kid, and it's great fun for an adult.
Absolutely. And
so, John, what do you want to the plot?
There's this stuff
Hold on to your hats, people.
This gets pretty involved. So there's this stuff called Element X, and it is a highly radioactive isotope, and there's a big stash of it at the North Pole. Evidently, the world has only found 3 ounces of this stuff until Doctor Who finds this. Yeah, not that Doctor Who. This is a better Doctor Who. Until Doctor Who finds this giant deposit at the North Pole. So he needs to mine this stuff. And again, it's highly radioactive. So someone has the idea, and jump in when you need to, Bob, if I mess something up. Someone decides that King Kong is the most powerful being on Earth, and he would be a natural for mining Element X.
Better than that. So our hero, Admiral Nelson, who is the commander of this submarine, in what I never quite understand the world politics of this film. It's sort of like Thunderbirds in that, like, there's this global super science administrative body.
Right.
It's not the UN, but everybody's sort of interconnected.
They pay lip service to the UN a lot.
When he's not running around in his superatomic submarine, he is a great researcher on the history of Kong, and also the idea of a mechanical Kong.
Yes, right. He designed the mechanical Kong.
I hope everyone's sitting down. He designed a 50-foot robot that looks and acts like the actual Kong, but is a great gleaming stainless steel robot.
With a utility belt that has grenades on it, giant grenades on it.
So Doctor Who steals the plans for the robot Kong from Admiral Nelson, and in his Arctic fortress, straight out of James Bond, builds a giant 50-foot robot, so the robot can go into the bowels of the earth and mine elements. He's doing, I might add, not just for fun and profit, but because he's in alliance with this beautiful Asian spy for an unnamed global power named Madame Piranha.
Played by Mie Hama.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. From You Only Live Twice.
All right, you want to pick it up from there?
Okay. So Mechana-Kong or Robot Kong, they never call him Mechana-Kong in the U.S. dubbed version. So Mechana-Kong goes and starts trying to mine the Element X. throwing his little grenades, relatively little grenades into the ice to bust the stuff up so he can get it.
And the score here is fabulous, by the way.
Yes, it is. And it doesn't take very long before Mechani-Kong craps out. The radioactivity of Element X just cooks all his circuitry, and Mechani-Kong is out of business. Madame Piranha is really cheesed off at Doctor Who because she has funded the construction of Mechani-Kong for nothing. And her country, her host country, whatever you want to call it, they want this stuff because they want to be a world superpower. I guess they want to make a lot of nuclear weapons with this stuff. Anyway, so Doctor Who asks for more time to fix his Mechani-Kong, and he talks about shielding the wiring and other things in order to make Mechani-Kong work better. So there's that. But in the meantime, Admiral Nelson ends up on Mondo Island, and because the submarine has been damaged and they need to surface and work on it, and they're right off the shore of Mondo Island, which happens to be where the real Kong reposes. So the group of people from the submarine, which includes Susan Watson, who is the ship's nurse, and Admiral Nelson, they go and they encounter Kong. And in the usual Kong story type thing, Kong is smitten with Susan, and it takes a dinosaur attacking Kong to let them get away. And so Kong, it's the usual thing with, Susan in Kong's hand and all that kind of stuff. So it really really lifts some stuff from the regular Kong there for a little bit.
And then at that point, if I could just jump in, Doctor Who, it's probably cheaper in the long run if I go to Mondo Island and kidnap the real Kong instead of fixing my 50-foot robotic Kong and hypnotize him, send him into the bowels of the earth to mine Element X. Because what else are you going to do in that situation, right?
Exactly.
So he and his flunkies and a whole bunch of toy helicopters go and knock out Kong, and they tie his arms and legs to these and they fly him away to Doctor Who's stronghold. I batted back.
They have this little apparatus, and again, I keep saying little. It's probably the size of a refrigerator.
Really tall guy, yes.
That goes in Kong's ear, and that lets them give him commands while he's under their spell. Kong goes into a tunnel that lets him get through the Element X easily, which always baffled me is if the stuff was so radioactive that it would cook the Mechani-Kong or whatever, and they can dig a tunnel to get almost there, all the way to it so that Kong can reach it. I thought that was always weird. But anyway, Kong starts trying to reach the Element X to start getting to work, but he just gets tired of the whole thing, rips the little refrigerator-sized bug out of his ear, and goes nuts. They have a giant gate built, and so they were able to trap him in this tunnel. So Kong's not cooperating. Mechani-Kong is busted, and Madame Piranha is really riding Doctor Who really hard at this point. So, Bob, I'll let you take the next little bit.
Where to start? Let's cut to the chase. At some point, Doctor Who kidnaps our beautiful ship's doctor to blackmail Kong into doing his bidding. He gives Mecha Kong a quick fix. Madame Piranha has a change of heart. Doctor Who tries to torture Susan and Commander Nelson, and it ends, of course, with Kong and Mecha Kong duking it out on what I think is the top of Tokyo Tower.
It is.
Of course, Mecha Kong then falls to, I would say, his death, but I guess they pulled his spark plugs. He fell,
right.
And then Susan, the bloodthirsty little wench, directs Kong to the submarine where Doctor Who is trying to escape, and Kong shakes this thing like a kid with a rattle, and this enormous desk crushes Doctor Who to death as the ship is sinking, and you see these great gouts of blood coming out of Doctor Who's mouth as he's crushed and everything is sinking and he's consumed by the waves. And then Kong swims away, and our hero, Admiral, is it Admiral Nelson or Commander Nelson? I keep confusing it with Voice of the Bottom of the Sea, who has the deepest voice in movies. It sounds like he went to broadcasting school in the Holland Tunnel. Says, I think he's had enough of what we call civilization. And
yes.
No credits, the end. And before we say another word, I have to tell you that this confection is the greatest movie ever made. And it sounds like we're attacking this like on a camp level, and I despise the whole notion of camp. I first off, I don't understand it. If you don't like something, that doesn't make it funny. That just means you don't like it. I actually think that this is a terrific movie. It's unbeatable entertainment, and it's great fun for a whole variety of reasons.
Right.
Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, well, I think you hit up on something here, and that is movies were meant as entertainment. Of course, there's plenty of them that enlighten and move us and teach us things and stuff. But we tend to take something like this, which was, of course, it was made for kids, and we belittle it when, as us sitting here talking about it, 40 years after we saw it, obviously it's entertaining. Obviously we loved it. And I don't in any way mean to be making fun of it. I adore this movie, and it's just a hoot. That's just all I can say about it. It's just a hoot. And as a kid, it delivered big time on the monster stuff. And I think that the plot is rather delirious, kind of in the same way that Phantom Empire with Gene Autry is sort of delirious. It has its own logic. And if you just hop on and ride it out, it's just wonderful. The technical stuff, which Eiji Surabaya and Ishiro Honda came up with time and time again, it's well done. It's beautiful. The color and the cinematography is just beautiful. It has a really good score, and it's just.
I have it on CD.
Oh, no, I don't. Now, that's something I'll have to look for. It's just a cool movie.
I talk about just what the plot does for a second. So as you said, you take these things sort of con amore or not at all. And the plot of King Kong Escapes is absolutely insane, but it's kind of insanely compelling because it's dealing really big cards, but it's dealing them absolutely fearlessly. Like they put down, one outlandish premise after another. And each one is bigger than the other. And it's almost like it's defying you to say, I defy you not to be enchanted by this because I'm going bigger and bigger every moment. Yeah. And at its essence, that's what I guess we could call it Pulp Fiction. That's what Pulp Fiction does. It deals its cards big, and the narrative is always big. And we don't go to it, for insight on the human condition. We go to it for thrills, for adventure, for laughs. And if you hit this stuff at just the right age, it's unbeatable entertainment. And because of the right age, I think it's important to if I can use a highbrow word, I think it's important to put King Kong Escapes in context. So If you look at when it was made, this is really a child's eye view of all kinds of things that were going on in pop culture, that was consumed by adults. So this is essentially a Bond movie with a giant King Kong robot.
Yes. When I watched it just the other day, and I was really struck by how much its plotting follows the James Bond thing, from the compound that Doctor Who has, and the King Kong rises up to it, sort of like the volcano and You Only Live Twice. Even the set design even looks like a lot of the Bond films, particularly You Only Live Twice.
And the whole design of the movie has that sort of space age modernism.
Yes.
That sort of Ken Adams space age modernism that was key to the look of the Bond films of the 60s. But not just the Bond films. I mean, King Kong Escapes looks like Johnny Quest.
Yes.
The New York World's Fair, the 1963 World's Fair. It looks like the cover of a Tom Swift novel at the time. And there was this whole aesthetic, this sort of streamlined jet set, jetpack, streamlined modernism. And if you want to understand what this aesthetic is and what it looks like and how it operates, sometimes you're better off looking at it in sort of its goofiest manifestations in something like King Kong Escapes,
right?
And I don't know, streamlined modern furniture that your grandparents had. But it's such a remarkable looking movie. You were talking about taking your daughter to Little Mermaid and things like that. There was, for movies for kids in that era, they weren't sanitized to the extent today. Madame Piranha is clearly a sort of predatory man-eating on a horror type. And this has things in it that would never fly in a kid's movie today. They're going to torture Susan by putting her beautiful face against the frozen wall that would take its flesh off. And Kong kills an Allosaurus or Tyrannosaurus, I'm never quite sure what it is, in a way that's actually more brutal than anything that takes place in the 1933 movie. And, Dr. Who's death is kind of gruesome. And there's also a love triangle between Commander Nelson and his sidekick that's never fully resolved. I never really know who Susan's interested in.
Well, the whole Kong being attracted to the, whoever it is, Aunt Darrow or Susan here or whatever, is always kind of weird. There's it's never as much as ever made of it, really, but it's just weird.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I never thought about it. But later I looked at it and I'm like, particularly the 76 one, you're just like, this is really odd.
I hate the 76 film. I just loathe that picture. It's
it's a mess. I loved it when it came out because it was a big deal. And actually, King Kong's in lots of stuff over the years, but there was a gap between King Kong Escapes and the 76 Kong. I had almost 10 years that we were Kongless.
Kongless, yes.
So, but this is probably a good time to go over the backstory of this thing.
Yeah.
So there's Rankin Bass. We all know Rankin Bass. They're the people who made all those wonderful Christmas specials, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, The Year Without a Santa Claus, my favorite. For those films, the animation was farmed out to Japanese companies more usually. In about 65, they had an animated show called The King Kong Show. And they licensed Kong from RKO. It was one of the first examples of anime that ever played in the States. So there was a King Kong show, and it was a little half-hour cartoon. And there were some episodes of the Kong show that had Doctor Who, who was a mad scientist, and in one or two episodes, he had invented a Mechani-Kong, which was a giant robot Kong, and King Kong fought it. And King Kong in the cartoon lived on an island called Mondo Island. And, in most other things, it's called Skull Island. But for the cartoon, it was Mondo Island. Somewhere along the way, the Rankin Bass folks and the Toho folks got together and decided to make a King Kong movie. Toho had already done King Kong versus Godzilla, which Universal had released, which is wonderful. So with this one, they came up with a story. They based it on stuff from the cartoon. That's why we have Doctor Who, and that's why we have the robot Kong, and that's why it's Mondo Island. And for the U.S. version, when Universal released it, we got Paul Frees to do Doctor Who's voice and most of the other male voices, except for Rhodes Reason does his own voice.
Rhodes Reason, brother of Rex Reason, star of This Island Earth.
Yes.
Deepest voices in movies.
And so Paul Frees is Paul Frees, So there's the additional tie to the Rankin Bass Christmas.
Yeah,
there's voice of most of those.
Santa Claus is Coming to Town, where Paul Frees, Meisterburger, and he's singing with his Confederate, who sounds sort of like Eric Blore. and Frees is doing his his sort of Eric von Stroheim voice, and they're singing a duet, and it's Paul Frees doing them both.
Wow. I love Paul Frees.
if he just went from voice to voice and did it in one cut, or did he do one character and then record the other character? They mixed him up later on. But Paul Frees, if you're listening to it, if you're watching a movie and there's a voiceover and you hear Orson Welles, but it's not, then it's Paul Frees.
Yep, he did War of the Worlds. He's one of the scientists in the original thing. He actually, you get to see him in that one. I love Paul Frees.
This looks like so this is a Toho film, right? And it is quote unquote a giant monster movie, but it has, not just because it's inspiration and its plot, but it has the feel of a Rankin Bass product.
It does, and that's really weird because I don't know, is it the editing? I mean, what is it? It does. It does not look exactly like your usual Toho movie, and there is something about it. Why it would have the feel of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I don't know, but it does.
I have two thoughts on that, both of which are worthless, but I have them. First is that if you look at the Rankin Bass oeuvre, they're usually surprisingly densely plotted.
Yeah.
I mean, even Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer has like 3 different plot points going on.
Right.
And the Godzilla films, or most of the Toho product, surprisingly is not. It's all very linear and sort of with mono plot lines.
Right.
But as you could tell as we were going through the synopsis here, the plot for Kong Escapes is sort of twisty and convoluted, and it feels like Rankin Bass storytelling. That's the first. And then also, there's a sort of tabletop magic to the Rankin Bass product. I mean, you never for a moment forget that what you're looking at is artificial.
Right.
And I know, there's no Japanese neorealism in the Toho products, but King Kong Escapes looks different because I don't think they're even shooting for the remotest sense of verisimilitude. I mean, they're creating their own sort of tabletop magic here. And it feels constrained is the word that's coming to mind, which is the wrong word because then it sounds restricted. But it has these rules that it has to adhere to within its own particular universe. And that includes the way it looks. Because as you say, King Kong Escape really doesn't look like any of the other Toho films.
No, it doesn't. It does and it doesn't, I guess is the way I would say it. The color is very saturated.
Yeah.
I mean, they all, a lot of them were in Technicolor, so the color was just sort of automatically saturated. But this one is more so. The scenes on Mondo Island, the vegetation, which is probably fake, is incredibly green. And, red is the color that we know Technicolor for. But in this one, the green really pops. And I don't know, it's real eye candy. And you don't normally think of these movies as eye candy, but this one is. And
yeah.
Maybe that's another tie to the James Bond movies, because they always had a really crazy color palette, pretty plush look.
Mechanicon, I think, is actually one of the beautiful images from the 60s. I mean, Mechanicon is just gorgeous.
And there are some really cool Japanese Mechanicon toys. And I would love to have one, but they're very expensive.
I don't have one. I wish I had one myself. In my 50s, and I want a Mechanicon toy.
Of course. But isn't that the way everybody is? We want these icons from our childhood or our youth or whatever, for somebody that might be some sort of sports memento or a car like their uncle had that was cool or whatever it might be.
Well, I'm at my desk and I have on my desk 2 busts. One, and most people, of course, on your desk, they have a bust of Churchill. Or FDR or Homer. I have a bust of Doc Savage and a bust of The Shadow. And when I look at them, I feel young again because Doc and The Shadow were big deals to me. And when I was looking at King Kong Escapes again, for this, I felt young again. And it's not just that I had memories, very happy memories of seeing not only King Kong Escapes, but movies like it. But it has this sense of adventure and this sense of playfulness. It's not restricted sort of by narrative rules that I would expect, as a more demanding adult. And I think we want or hold on to these mementos because, on some primal level, they not only make us feel young again, but they keep us young.
I think you're right. Leading up to this, watching it the other day, researching a little bit. A couple of months ago, I came upon the Blu-ray of it, and so I upgraded from DVD to Blu-ray, using this as absolutely. So I use this as the excuse. All this time, all this anticipation for doing this, it just made me feel good. Finding behind the scenes photos or looking at the lobby card set or watching the movie itself or coming across the radio spots that are going to be cut into this podcast. All that stuff, everything just made me feel good. It's just happy. I think that's, my wife is a huge old TV fan, and she just puts on, whatever it is, the Brady Bunch or Andy Griffith or Lucy, or she loves Burns and Allen.
Oh, she has good taste.
Yeah, she just puts on things like that. And our world is a mess right now. And so if there was ever a time that things like Burns and Allen or King Kong Escapes do their job, it's today to make us feel a little better. And so that's a really cool thing. Look at how many people return to things like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Every year. And their kids do it. And, it's like how many generations have turned to these things, watch these things and love them. It's weird. You go to the store and look at the Christmas decorations. How much of it is the Grinch?
Or Rudolph. Amazing.
Or Rudolph. Those things, they just have a life to them that just doesn't go. They just keep on chugging. It's great.
People who are significant than we are watched Rudolph the first time when they were kids. That just shocks me.
My mom says that I watched it, and I was born in '64, which is the year it first aired. So I wouldn't have seen it then. Wouldn't have paid much attention to it then. But she said that, when it came around, and I wouldn't watch it because I got upset that they wouldn't let Rudolph play. So I didn't get very far. So, but yeah, it's a constant.
Talking about happy. So what are the holiday things? Now that we're in Rankin Bass land, what are the holiday things, either movies or specials, that you keep coming back to?
I absolutely love The Year Without a Santa Claus. I love The Heat Miser and The Cold Miser. I love them. That's one of my favorites. And then, of course, there's Christmas. That's of the specials. That's my favorite. I love Rudolph. Rudolph was one of the first DVDs I ever bought. Here we go from a
giant mechanical Kong to the Grinch, but it's all a spectrum of things that make you happy. Right. It would be the very first Christmas special, which is the Mr. Magoo Christmas Carol, which I actually think is the finest adaptation of A Christmas Carol, and also has, of course, the voices of Paul Frees. At one point, he's, I think, the voices of all of the Victorian lowlives who are selling the dead Scrooges. One of them, he's doing his Karloff voice.
Right.
This box of pencils. And he's singing in four different voices at the same time. It's quite. And Jim Backus as Mr. Magoo is just this incredibly rich comic creator.
Oh yeah.
And he's so perfect, I think, for A Christmas Carol, because there's something almost Dickensian in the scope of Magoo.
Yeah. Let's stop and talk about Jim Backus for a second. So from Mechanic Kong to Jim Backus, think about him in Rebel Without a Cause. What a tremendous performance that is.
Yeah.
But he's still Jim Backus.
Yes.
And then you look at him in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, where he's the drunk guy at the country club who's going to fly them.
Or Man of a Thousand Faces, where he's
he is someone. And then I Married Joan. He's great in that.
Man in the Cloak. He's Edgar Allan Poe's character.
Yeah, he's somebody that we just, and of course there's Thurston Howell III. He is just this talent that has been pigeonholed over time. We do not appreciate the genius that is Jim Backus, I think.
Well, people like Jim Backus are ubiquitous when you're growing up, and they sort of weave themselves into the fabric of your lives. You wake up one morning and you're middle-aged, you go, you're like, Jim Backus is like an uncle to me.
Right, exactly.
Loving memories of him.
We just sort of think of them as it's really easy to not think about that this guy had to get up and figure out how to play these parts and go do his job every day. He's just Jim Backus. And so I have, over time, especially as I have worked on my Westerns book, I have developed this appreciation for character actors like him and so many of the others, and how they had first of all, they just got up and did it. Like we all get up and go to work. These guys just got up and went to work, but they did it by delivering really solid performances in one movie after another. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And, you don't think that Jim Backus had to figure out how to play Thurston Howell.
No.
But he did. He had to develop that character in his mind and then play it for dozens of episodes and be funny every single time.
And Mr. Magoo, for that matter, which is an incredibly rich comic performance.
Right. And he had to do it we couldn't look at him. I mean, it's just his voice. And Jim Backus is one of those people. He's like W.C. Fields. I hear his name and I either smile or laugh out loud. They're just funny. And he's just wonderful. So anyway,
if I could do a Christmas movie, because I did a Christmas movie, I have. If you ask me, in an hour, I'll probably give you a different answer. But if you were to ask me now this morning at 8:30 in the morning, I would tell you it's Miracle on 34th Street. And the reason I love that movie is I'm surprised that it was made in the late 40s, because it really has the sensibility of a 30s screwball comedy rather than a late 40s sort of whimsical fantasy. And I say that because the best screwball comedies had this unique sort of signature note for the 30s of deep and profound cynicism and almost saccharinely sweet sentimentality. Yeah. And Miracle on 34th Street, straddles that magnificently. So, you believe that this guy is Santa Claus, but he's only saved from being condemned to the madhouse because some postal workers didn't want to be bothered.
Exactly.
And everybody is either championing him or persecuting him for their own private aims. I mean, at one point, John Payne is doing this because he's a good guy, but it's also going to be great for his career if he pulls it off. And the villain, Shellhammer, is trying to get ahead in the Macy's Corporation. So he thinks that Kris Kringle is undermining his authority as an expert. And of course, you have Maureen O'Hara, who's sort of like King Kong Escapes. You like her or you don't. Yeah. Who's, cold and heartless, but, just waiting for the right person to melt her heart. And it's these sort of 30s grace notes where everybody has their private agenda, and it's fairly cynical, but also very, very, very sweet. I think it's kind of unique in Christmas movies for that reason.
Yeah, that's an interesting way. And also you saying the combination of cynicism and sweetness, that always makes me think of John Ford.
Yeah.
His movies, he deals with that constantly, and then in some of his films like The Searchers, he was criticized for it by dumping that knockabout comedy stuff right in the middle of, the darkest movie he ever made. So I love that. That is and Preston Sturges would do that too.
Well, look at Three Godfathers, which is a great Christmas movie and a terrific Western. I mean, you have three really bad men who are melted.
Yep.
Their evil hearts are melted by a baby. Our more cynical selves are like, they would leave it for the wolves. But our more sentimental selves are like, yeah, even hard cases can be redeemed by the love of a baby. And it's right before Christmas, and they are following a star.
Yep. And then Ford just dumps all that religious allegory and stuff in it. In anybody else's hands, it would be laughed off the screen. But he can somehow, he can pull it off.
Pulled it off. It's magnificent. I don't know why it's not considered, one of the great Christmas movies, because it is a Christmas movie.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But, there are no Christmas trees and no Santa Claus and no angels. Christmas. We're doing, this is our Thanksgiving show or your Thanksgiving show. We might as well. Christmas will be down our throats in a moment.
Well, we've been dealing in Rankin Bass, so that's automatically Christmas.
So but Christmas movies, do not have to be necessarily about Christmas Presents or Santa Claus or
No.
I mean, a great Christmas movie can be a picture like Three Godfathers.
Right. Some people consider Die Hard a Christmas movie, which to me it just sort of just happens to be set at Christmas time at the Christmas party, in the Christmas party. But it has been dumped into the Christmas movie bucket. So
So is Batman Returns, but that's not what I want to cuddle up to on Christmas Eve.
No, exactly.
For Batman Returns, but Christmas Eve, I don't want to watch Michelle Pfeiffer thrown out a window. It's like not my idea. Call me old-fashioned. Call me a fuddy-duddy.
Now we get to the portion of our podcast where we deal with the Death Row Film Festival. And since this is going to be first aired during Thanksgiving week, we'll make it the holiday version. So here's the deal, Bob. You're going to be sent to the chair on the day after Christmas, December 26th.
After Christmas.
After Christmas. The kindly prison warden says, since he knows you're a movie nut, that you can watch any movie you want and you can enjoy it with whatever meal or snack you want. What would that be?
Well, so it's the day after Christmas. This is a kind of bleak holiday question, I'm just saying.
Oh, I know.
The day after Christmas, I want lots of bread pudding. I could live on bread pudding exclusively if that was possible. I adore bread pudding.
Me too.
Bread pudding, and I would pick a really long movie because I want to stay alive as long as humanly possible. I would pick. No, I was going to pick that Andy Warhol movie that's 24 hours long.
That's a lot of bread pudding.
A lot of bread pudding. Since it's a day after Christmas, I would go with the George C. Scott, A Christmas Carol, because after
that's a good one.
Because after the Mr. Magoo, which I think is, as we said before, the best version of A Christmas Carol, I think the best live action version of A Christmas Carol is the George C. Scott. And that's mainly because not only is Scott terrific, but it's the only one that I can think of where the supporting cast, everyone across the board, is as good as the guy playing Scrooge. And a lot of them are playing against type. So you have David Warner, who, I think of as Jack the Ripper or the guy who gets his head cut off in The Omen. Spectacular as Bob Cratchit, who's just this sort of woebegone working class guy. You have Angela Pleasance, Donald Pleasance's daughter, as the creepiest ghost of Christmas past I think ever could. And you have Edward Woodward, the equalizer, essentially playing Santa Claus as the ghost of Christmas present. And there's a moment when he's berating Scrooge in Bob Cratchit's house, where you think the ghost of Christmas present is about to take out a sword and just beat the tar out of Scrooge. And it's a wonderful moment. I love Michael Gough is in it. Frank Finlay is in it as Jacob Marley. If I'm going to die the day after Christmas, I want to go after seeing the Scott A Christmas Carol. If it was other day, it was probably a different movie. But if I'm going to die, the day after Easter, I want it to be the greatest story ever told. Or
right.
If it's February 15th, I want it to be My Bloody Valentine. But
it's really interesting that you picked that because that's the Alistair Sim Christmas Carol is the one that's always held up as the great one, which of course it's great.
It is great. I don't think it's as good.
No, it might not be.
If you have a second, because I have a crackpot theory about this.
I love crackpot theories. Go ahead.
To be a great Scrooge, you have to be one of two things. You have to be either a great comedian or you have to be a great tragedian.
Right.
And Sim is a great comedian and Scott is a great tragedian. And I think that if in your core, if you are a comic actor, then the reclamation at the end has less payoff because that part of you is always present. But
right.
If you're a tragedian, then the reclamation at the end where you're lighthearted and happy has greater bite because it's more unexpected.
Right. That's a great point. George C. Scott's great. He made a lot of movies that aren't great, but he was great. I mean, even The Changeling was a terrific ghost movie.
It's my favorite ghost movie.
It's a great movie.
I saw that, scared the tar out of me. There's nothing in it that's frightening. There's no. It's not There's no blood. There's nothing. It just has this sort of washed out, bleak New England aesthetic.
He's so good at it. And I saw it in the theater, and when it first came out, and it just blew me away. His comic skills are usually overlooked. He was he's hilarious in Doctor Strangelove, of course. But there's a really I think I was probably one of the few people that ever went to see this thing when it came out. Do you remember a film with him called The Bank Shot?
Of course.
Was based on the Donald Westlake book. I love that movie. And
it's a terrific picture.
Well, I'm glad to know that you love. Why do we like all the movies that everyone else hates?
Well, either we have no tastes or we're part of the avant-garde. I haven't made up my mind. When I was a teenager, I saw George C. Scott on Broadway. He was in, you'll love this, he was in a Noel Coward play.
Oh, wow.
Present Laughter. And every Noel Coward play, plays like it demands Clifton Webb in the leading role. And Present Laughter is about this self-involved dandy who lives in dressing gowns and wears pearl-colored spats and kid gloves. And Scott played that with his tiny little pencil-lined mustache. Nathan Lane, it was like one of his first Broadway roles, played the playwright. I went in having no expectation that Scott would be able to pull this off because he's a big lumbering hulk of a guy.
Yeah, yeah.
And 5 minutes into it, he's Clifton Webb. And I just thought it was just the most remarkable performance I had seen of him because it was the thing that I thought he never would be able to pull off. I'm sorry that this Present Laughter that he did on Broadway wasn't videotaped for PBS or preserved. But, if you can imagine George C. Scott cosseted in a double-breasted vest with pearl gray spats and kid gloves doing his Clifton Webb impression, it was really something to see. It was
wow.
It was yes. I don't know why we like so many things. I will tell you what, this is going to sound like I'm stroking our mutual egos, but I would say that there is in the things that you and I both seem to gravitate to, both a sort of sincerity. Because I don't know about you, I'm utterly and completely irony free. I don't understand irony. So there's a sort of sincerity, but there's also, I think, even in some of the grimmest stuff that we like, there's a sort of underlying sweetness. The older I get, the less patience I have with things that are lacking that quality. And when I say sweetness, I'm not talking about a sort of saccharine sentimentality as much as I'm talking about a delicacy of touch and a sense of complicity and compassion for the audience. And I like stuff that makes me respond in that way, or that is created in that tone. Which is why something like, much as I adore Batman Returns. I think it's a great movie. It's my favorite Batman picture after the 1966 Batman, believe it or not. But I never watched this on Christmas because it's lacking that quality of gentleness. I would watch, believe it or not, I would watch the 1966 Batman on Christmas Eve.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's hysterically funny. It's one of my favorite movies from the 60s. It's great to look at. I mean, you're talking about eye candy from King Kong Escapes. I mean, look at the Batman in 1966. You watch this movie, your eyeballs get fat.
Yep.
And it's so smart, and like Kong Escapes, it's one of those movies that kids watch and adults watch, and they watch it for different reasons. Now, I don't think adults watch Kong and for the comedy value, but adults did watch Batman for the comedy value, and there's this whole sort of historical revisionism that started taking place in the 80s that that was somehow bad, or right. They did it wrong. But if you look at TV Guide, that was listed as a comedy, and Frank Gorshin won the Emmy for Best Supporting Actor in a comedy. So I mean, there was never any pretense that this was anything other than what it was.
Let me tell you my Batman 66 movie story real quick. In 1986, for its 20th anniversary, I was in college in Colorado, and the Batman movie came back. And it was playing somewhere in Denver. And I went, bought my ticket, walked into the theater, and there in the lobby was the Batmobile.
Wow.
I was the first. I've seen the Batmobile a few times since then, but that was my first experience with the Batmobile. And I had no idea it was going to be there. I just walked in and there it was. I remember sitting there watching the movie, and I had never seen it in the theater before. I'd seen it many, many times, of course. And I just was loving the movie, but I just kept thinking, the Batmobile is out there.
Yes, I'm close enough to the Batmobile.
Exactly. On the other side of that wall is the Batmobile, right next to the Raisinets. I mean, what in the world is greater than the Batmobile and Raisinets? I mean, it was just, every time I watch that movie now, I think about sitting there knowing that the real Batmobile was sitting in the same building with me. It was incredible.
So the New York Historical Society, back when I lived in New York, had this exhibition on the history of comic books. And they had the Batmobile in the museum. And I'm standing there in front of it for like a half hour. And somebody walked up to me, because I had been there a long time. He said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Genuflecting." I was at the Batmobile. Good God. I was so excited.
There's something about, I mean, it's just one of those icons from our upbringing. But, you were talking about sincerity, and that brings up two things that I appreciate mainly for that sincerity. The first one is the Lone Ranger, which we both know and love.
Yes.
And then there's nothing more sincere to me than, one, the Lone Ranger in general, and then Clayton Moore and his dedication to the Lone Ranger that went through the rest of his life. And then the other one is Dragnet.
Dragnet, curious. Why?
I just felt like Jack Webb is the cheerleader for law enforcement. And that he had an admiration for those people, and he was going to put it on the screen and teach us how law enforcement worked and why we should respect these people. And I think that comes through. And of course, people look at it now and it seems a little goofy. And, the way they created those episodes on a assembly line, more or less, and the aesthetic part of it is so brutal. And I just think that Webb's sincerity and respect for law enforcement, it just carries that show. I love Dragnet.
I love his staccato delivery.
Yeah, everything about it is so stylized. It's a documentary approach based on real cases. But it's so stylized. It's just this own thing. There's nothing like Dragnet.
So
nothing else comes close to Dragnet.
But I grew up on another Jack Webb show called Emergency.
Yeah, I love Emergency.
Which was about paramedics.
Yep, I love it.
And it had that same sincerity. I adored Emergency when I was a kid.
Yeah, well, Adam 12 is the same way.
Adam 12, yes.
Oh, I love Adam 12.
Adam 12, see the man. See the one.
The thing is funny is I grew up watching those shows. I loved all of them. And then when Presley, our daughter, was, I don't know, about 6, she bumped into Adam 12 on, I don't know, whatever channel was running it. And she got hooked on it. She really got into Adam 12. And it just sort of reignited this thing with me and Jack Webb. I mean, it's like it was this little tiny candle that was burning, and she squirted lighter fluid on it, and it ended up doing the commentary for the Dragnet movie Blu-ray and stuff. I mean, anyway, how have we gone from Rankin Bass to King Kong to George C. Scott on Broadway to Jack Webb?
We're talking about love. No, I'm serious. We're talking about love.
Every 60 seconds, a crime is committed in Los Angeles. In the Los Angeles Police Department's communications center, the telephone rings every 20 seconds, 24 hours a day. Every time a policeman answers a call, he takes a calculated risk. There'll always be somebody out there who doesn't like him.
Well, that's about it. I want to thank Bob Madison. Be sure to check out his book Spiked on Amazon.com. And a great big thank you to all of you who've made it this far, listening to two old guys rambling on and on about stuff they loved when they were kids. Happy Thanksgiving to you all.
This has been the Carbon Arc. Thanks for stopping by.